Lord Browne, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the Royal Academy of Engineering, and for those of you for whom it's the first visit especially. My name is David Waboso. I'm the Director of Capital Programmes for London Underground, part of Transport for London. It gives me great pleasure to chair this evening's discussion on the vital subject of resources for humanity. As I look around this room, I'm delighted to see so many of our brightest and youngest engineers, including no doubt some from London Underground and Transport for London. It's a privilege to have this opportunity to step back from all the day-to-day stuff we do and think about the future of our profession and the value of what we contribute. This brings me to Lord Browne's headline mission as President, to put engineering at the heart of society. As your term of office draws to a close, it is a good time to note the considerable progress we've made under your leadership, both as an academy and as a profession. This progress is reflected in better engagement with the public, a markedly better profile in the media, and I think a better involvement of engineers in government policy. I want to thank you, John, for your inspired leadership and vision. You have left a legacy that we all intend to build on. As engineers, we deploy the resources of the world for the benefit of humanity. This is the theme of tonight's lecture. John, I invite you to give your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes and then and see if I can do it for less to keep you, make sure no one goes to sleep, and then we can have a conversation after that. But welcome again to the Royal Academy of Engineering. Our profession, which is engineering, underpins the progress of humankind. For thousands of years, engineers have unlocked the natural resources of the earth for the benefit of humanity. Engineers have given practical application to scientific endeavour, driving economic growth and bringing billions out of poverty. In the future, it's going to be engineers using the Earth's resources in new ways who continue that progress, solving the great challenges we face today. But for engineers to succeed, they must play more than a supporting role. They must be at the forefront of society as leaders capable of driving change, not following it. That's why I'm delighted to see you all here this evening as some of the best engineers of your generation on your way to becoming the leaders of tomorrow. This evening, what I want to do is discuss what it means to be a leader and how being an engineer equips you for that role. In particular, I want to talk about the leadership role of engineers in marshalling two vital resources, energy and water. But before we begin, I'd like to point out that this evening is part of our celebrations of the 35th anniversary of this Academy. In 1976, the founding fellows met at, there they are, at Buckingham Palace for the inaugural meeting of what was then the Fellowship of Engineering. They all look very distinguished. Among them are Prince Philip, Earl Mountbatten of Burma, and 128 other distinguished engineers, including Barnes Wallis, the inventor of the bouncing bomb, Ove Arup, the great architectural engineer, and George McFarlane, the pioneer of radar. Their vision was about how engineering can be promoted for the national benefit, for the progress in wider society, and for the future of humankind. I have had the pleasure and privilege of serving as President of the Academy over the last 5 years. Next month, I hand over to my successor, Sir John Parker, and I can use a wonderful line, it's time to hand over to an older man. And I want briefly to reflect on how we're working to realise the vision of the founding fellows. Through its fellowship, the Academy has been working to foster a much better understanding amongst the public and opinion formers of what engineers do and can achieve. We're helping to create an education system that inspires and encourages young people to choose a career in engineering. And we're supporting the kind of research and ideas that businesses can profitably turn into wealth. There's still a long way to go, but I think we've made real progress towards the vision of our founders. Above all, engineers are increasingly recognised by policymakers and society as essential to addressing the grand challenges we all face. One of the greatest of those challenges is providing adequate supplies of water, the first arena for engineering leadership that I want to discuss this evening. So, the need to marshal natural water resources to serve humanity was behind some of the very earliest engineering. For the engineers of ancient China, the Roman Empire, and the Islamic Golden Age, water supply was the preeminent challenge. In this photograph, for example, we see the glorious Pont de Gare, spanning almost 300 meters, 50 meters above the ground, and weighing 50,000 tons. It was constructed by the Romans 2,000 years ago and is still standing today. At its peak, it carried 200 million litres a day to the citizens of Nîmes, feeding the prosperity and development of the city. The strength of Rome's empire relied in so many ways on the ingenuity of her engineers. In the intervening millennia, engineering our water supplies may have become less glamorous, but it is no less important to our health and prosperity. The achievement of today's water engineers are just as impressive as their Roman counterparts. Here, for example, is a desalination plant in Barcelona, not as romantic, but it uses reverse osmosis to provide drinking water to over 1 million people. With projects like these, engineers managed to provide clean drinking water to almost 6 billion people on Earth, a breathtaking achievement for humanity. But big challenges remain. Most shocking is that almost 1 billion people still live without a safe supply of water. That's not an insoluble problem. It's technologically possible to provide clean water for everyone. But many communities don't have the financial resources, and more importantly, the political structures needed to implement solutions. That means engineers have to create innovative systems that are not only technically adequate, but that are deliverable given the financial and social resources available. In many cases, that means building small-scale water systems that are cheap to deploy and easy to repair, systems such as this rainwater collector in Kerala, South India, which can easily be built and maintained by local communities without external assistance. To an engineer, it's second nature to design systems like this, systems that meet multiple constraints, technical, social, and financial. That's also a crucial skill for a leader, whether delivering drinking water to a village in rural India or tackling larger scale projects. The first step must always be to understand the context of the project and in particular the resources available. Doing so allows you to define the purpose and the strategy of your organization. Providing access to those without water is not the only challenge that water engineers face. Even greater is the problem of water scarcity. Many regions have an adequate supply network but don't have enough water to keep it flowing. In this map, the area of each nation reflects its total water consumption. As is obvious, consumption across the globe is grossly unequal. The average American citizen, for example, uses 10 times as much water as the average citizen of Zambia. The problem is most acute in developing countries where population is growing most rapidly and lifestyles are becoming ever more water intensive. In many of those countries, a pattern of water stress is already emerging. Irrigation for agriculture, which underpins many developing economies, has to compete increasingly with new industries, particularly tourism and manufacturing. Rapidly expanding urban populations add another pressure on water and sewerage systems. In pursuit of new jobs in new industries, the majority of the world's population now live for the first time in history in towns and cities. As a result of climate change, some of the world's poorest regions are predicted to experience less precipitation, worsening problems of water scarcity. So water scarcity has serious consequences. It retards economic development, it damages health and hygiene, and it leads to conflict in society as factions struggle over limited resources. Addressing these challenges requires engineers to act not just as technical experts, but as communicators, aligning diverse groups of policymakers, entrepreneurs, and activists behind a project. Nowhere illustrates my point better than the nation of Jordan, one of the most water-poor countries in the world, one I've been to many times. I've seen for myself how the once mighty River Jordan has been reduced by more than 90% to little more than a stream in places, as in this photograph, thanks to the extraction of water by Israel, Jordan, and Syria. As a result, the Dead Sea, which is fed by the River Jordan, is falling by about a metre a year, and the 6 million inhabitants of Jordan's capital, Amman, receive water only once or twice a week. In response, Jordan is undertaking a massive engineering project, constructing almost 1,000 kilometres of pipeline to carry water north from the Red Sea, to replenish the Dead Sea and to provide water for Amman. The scale and complexity of this Red to Dead project is huge. It'll eventually carry close to 1 billion cubic metres of water a year and cost up to $10 billion. The technical challenges for engineers are vast. But just as challenging are the political and environmental considerations. Engineers have to design a system that can win the agreement of Jordanians, Israelis, and Palestinians. No mean feat. And they must satisfy environmentalists that are minimizing the impact on the ecology of the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, and the Araba Valley in between. The engineers working on Red to Dead are not just technicians and experts, they're actually diplomats and negotiators. That ability is crucial to successful leadership. Leaders must be able to align multiple parties, both internal and external, behind their strategy to achieve success. In life, there are few resources as important as water, but one other comes as close, my second topic this evening, and actually the focus of my career, energy. Energy is essential for heat, light, and mobility, as well as food, communication, and consumer goods. It underpins economic growth and the spread of social progress. Throughout history, engineers have developed new sources of energy. They started with biomass in the form of wood and feedstuff from working animals. In the Industrial Revolution, they started to unlock the vast energy trapped in fossil fuels, first coal, then oil, then natural gas. And in the last few decades, engineers have introduced a new generation of energy sources, nuclear and renewables. The unlocking of new resources has repeatedly revolutionized our economic, social, and political lives, changing the way we work, live, and travel. But today we face a formidable challenge to maintain the supplies of energy that underpin human progress. Energy demand continues to grow strongly, driven by population growth and increasing prosperity. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, estimates that the world will consume 40% more energy in 2035 than it does today. At the same time, conventional supplies are becoming increasingly concentrated in the hands of very few nations. In this map, the area of each nation is proportional to its oil reserves, a different map from water. The level of concentration is immediately obvious. 3 nations, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Venezuela, control more than 40% of global oil reserves, while Russia, Iran, and Qatar control more than half of the world's conventional natural gas reserves. In recent months, political events in the Middle East and North Africa and the subsequent rise in the price of oil have demonstrated how this concentration jeopardizes our energy security. Meanwhile, as we strive to meet growing demand and guarantee energy security, we must also dramatically reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of our energy production. As engineers have unlocked energy from the Earth, they have also unlocked carbon, with unprecedented and uncertain risks for our climate. This chart, well known, shows the increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide since 1980, alongside the increase in global average temperatures. It's a profound truth, only now being recognized, that we cannot grow first, pollute second, and clean up third. So the challenge is great: to meet the world's energy demand in a way that's affordable, secure, and clean. There's no easy solution. We have to make very difficult decisions involving uncomfortable trade-offs, because every source of energy comes with significant risks. Take, for example, natural gas. Technological innovation has made it possible to extract natural gas from places previously thought impossible. The most significant development has been a fall in the cost of a process called hydraulic fracturing, injecting water and sand into a well to fracture underground rocks and to release the gas trapped inside. That's made it economic to produce gas from shale formations. Thanks to these shale resources, the US, for example, is now self-sufficient in natural gas and will be so probably for the foreseeable future, an unthinkable prospect only a few years ago. Elsewhere around the world, such as this site in Lancashire, shale gas presents an opportunity for countries to develop more secure domestic supplies. But shale gas, like every source of energy, has inherent risks. In particular, the industry is struggling to win public acceptance for its use of hydraulic fracturing. Although historic evidence points to the safety of the process, many fear it could contaminate water supplies, and concerns have already led to bans in New York State and the Republic of France halting exploration in its tracks. For that reason, we can't rely too heavily on natural gas as a solution to the energy challenge. New sources of oil also have the potential to introduce variety into our supplies, and there are particularly promising resources in the deep waters of West Africa, Brazil, and the American Gulf of Mexico, where this gigantic BP Thunder Horse rig is based. For some ideas of the scale, its surface area is the size of 3 football pitches. On land, Canadian oil sands and North American shale for oil have tremendous potential. But at these frontiers, there are significant risks. There are operational risks when people, systems, or processes fail, as we saw with the devastating consequences of last year's oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. There are political risks, which can be unpredictable, sudden, and deeply damaging. And there are strategic risks, too. Partnerships and acquisitions can rapidly turn sour, even after the most rigorous due diligence. What these risks have in common is that they can't be eliminated. Exploring uncharted territories with innovative technology and untested partners is an inherently risky activity. Nuclear power is another important alternative, but the events at the Fukushima power plant in Japan, shown here before the disaster, have cast its future into doubt. Germany, for example, plans to shut all its reactors quite soon. In my view, that response is misguided. Abandoning nuclear power would likely mean increasing our use of coal, a far more dangerous source. Every year, thousands of coal miners die in accidents, and air pollution from coal causes hundreds of thousands of premature deaths. But the catastrophic potential of nuclear power understandably generates fear and makes public acceptance very difficult. Alongside insecure fossil fuels and unpopular nuclear, renewable power looks increasingly attractive, both for its environmental benefits and its ability to provide secure domestic energy. Experience in the industry is growing and costs are falling. Over the last 5 years, annual investment has grown 5-fold, and the price of solar cells, for example, has fallen by 3/4. But despite that, renewable technology remains in general far more expensive than the conventional alternatives. So we face an energy landscape of tough choices, with expense and risk wherever we turn. As the former Chinese Minister of Energy, the National Energy Administrator, said to me earlier this month, a surprising admission for the Chinese, whatever we do, we're criticized by someone. That, I think, is the law in energy. In the end, we won't find a single source of energy that solves all our problems. We will rely on a new mix of sources that balances the environmental and financial costs of different technologies, and that reduces risks through diversity. In my view, fossil fuels, nuclear, and renewables will form part of that mix, and developing a new mix requires a revolution in all aspects of energy production and consumption. In Saudi Arabia, for example, water desalination, making fresh water, is currently responsible for more than half of all domestic oil consumption. That means that 1 barrel out of every 50 barrels of world supply is used to make water in Saudi Arabia, at a vast cost to them in terms of lost exports. The Saudi government is now beginning the transition to solar-powered desalination, realizing that it makes both commercial and perhaps environmental sense. Transformations like that must take place across the world. It'll be engineers who drive the process. Engineers will develop the technology to exploit the new renewable resources at our disposal. Wind, wave, and nuclear power are already providing exciting opportunities even for UK industry. Engineers will build the systems to make fossil fuel plants cleaner and more efficient, and potentially capture and store the carbon emitted. And engineers will improve the efficiency of energy consumption across every industry, ensuring that our economic prosperity is sustainable in the long term. In every case, engineers have a unique skill that makes them invaluable, an ability to execute solutions with a grasp of both technical details and commercial reality. That means not only understanding how a system works, but understanding how to implement complex change, how to manage risk, and how to keep control of costs. And that capability must be at the heart of society if we're to deliver the new energy mix successfully and affordably. And that's why engineers must act as leaders, not as followers. I believe leadership requires 3 core skills: the ability to define a vision that fits your context, the ability to align diverse parties to work towards that vision, and an ability to execute that vision effectively and efficiently. Engineers, by the very nature of their training and work, are equipped with these skills better than any other profession. Every day, engineers create plans to fit their context, like those designing rainwater catchment tanks in Kerala. They appreciate the resources available to them and the constraints they face. Every day, engineers align diverse parties to reach a common goal, like those planning the Red to Dead project in Jordan. They understand how to communicate a vision with broad appeal. And every day, engineers execute solutions efficiently, like those working on the energy systems of the future. They grasp how to manage risk and control costs. So that's why I was so keen to speak to you tonight. For too long, engineering has been seen by others somehow as a supporting profession. I'm afraid that often, too often, engineers have gone along with that perception, when in fact engineers with their unique skill set are leaders and need to be the drivers of change. As engineers in whatever field, you have a unique and crucial role to play in transforming the natural resources of the planet into a benefit for humanity, a role that has never been more important than today. We live in a world more interconnected and intertwined than ever before, and that adds complication, but it also multiplies opportunity. A leader in one place can make a greater difference than ever before. And your challenge is to take this opportunity and make the most of it. Work with us, work with your professional bodies, equip yourself with the skills and experience you need to become leaders of tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's your turn. I think I haven't broken my promise. I think I'm pretty well on track. So it's really over to you to have a dialogue. David, back to you.
Let's start. Well, thank you very much, Lord Browne. I have to say I found that the most incredibly inspiring speech. So this is the time we have the conversation. So I'm going to invite, Lord Browne has kindly agreed to take questions. They're roving microphones. And when you are given the microphone, can you please say your name and your affiliation? I'm going to start with a couple of pre-submitted questions to get things going. And the first one is from Chris Martin, who's CEO of Spirajet. Is Chris here? Thank you. So I've done your name and affiliation for you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for a fascinating and illuminating talk. Very motivating. It seems perhaps that the failure of capital markets to allocate resources efficiently to engineered solutions for sustained social development is at least as big a challenge as the technology itself. What role do you think engineers can play in helping to solve that particular problem?
First, thank you for your question. I've always believed that engineers do and should be part of understanding whether any strategy can actually be executed for the long term. And in order to do that, you have to look at all the social consequences, good and bad, and do something about it. Because sustainability, and I'm not using that in the rather technical way that people use it nowadays, but I mean broadly, can you keep something going? It means that you have to keep everyone aligned at all times. So I think the capital markets are peculiar beasts. On the one hand, they look as if they're assessing quarterly performance results. And that's kind of true. And if you let them take you in that direction, they will surely take you in that direction. You can resist, though, and you should say, but I want to show you the following. I want to show you the people who are running the company or the project. I want to show you why I'm doing it and why you can rely on me to do it for a long time, because I'm investing in the other parts of my business, the social structures, the environment, the community well-being, and so forth. Interestingly, I now work in the private part of capital markets, private equity, where in order to do an investment, I think my view is I first look at the management. Secondly, I look at how they manage themselves and the wider environment. Thirdly, I look at their project. And fourthly, I look at the finances, in that order.
Fascinating.
Thank you very much.
Okay. The second question is, we're privileged to have here Sir John Pennington, who's the Government Chief Advisor.
Yes, I'm feeling rather nervous in this environment as Chief Scientific Advisor as opposed to be Chief Engineering Advisor. But I suppose I can sort of justify that I do have a sort of a team of 17 chief scientists, of which 7 are engineers, so it's not quite as bad as that. John, one of the things that concerns me is the complex interaction, not just between water and energy, but the water, energy, climate change, and actually food too. And one of the areas that is really concerning me is the fact that that effectively to get agriculture enough food to eat, currently something like 70% of available water is used by agriculture, and in the developing world that's about 85%. And yet the incentives for significant investment in engineering projects for agriculture are really quite slight because of the rates of return. Is there a way out of that conundrum that you can see?
Probably not directly, as you know. I think it's curious that the cost of food has risen in relationship to the cost of energy, which has indeed been related to the pricing of water, not wholly around the world. So some signals make other things possible as time goes by. For example, we haven't used all the land yet by any means, and when I go to Brazil, I see animal husbandry at the most extraordinary inefficient levels. I mean, there's 1 cow per hectare, as opposed to, what is it, 500 or something? I've forgotten what the right number is. But it means that adjustments are now taking place. Adjustments and conflicts, I may say, because, cows need soy, soybeans are grown, soybeans take out rainforests, soybeans therefore reduce the amount of precipitation. They then require further artificial ways of being irrigated. So I think my only comment to this is you better make sure you have people, not just policymakers, but people who understand implications as these changes take place. And that we think about the next revolution in agricultural technology, which has happened every so often over the last 200 years.
Thank you very much. The third question is from Selene Raheem from IMD Medicines.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Lord Browne, for your presentation. It was very good. What I would like to ask you, firstly, we at home, we can start by being sustainable, by using less energy, by recycling and reusing as the key drive these days. I want to ask you what you believe are the key resources we require in preference to create a sustainable future for humanity.
In priority order, I think the answer is very difficult to come up with a priority order. We need, obviously, we need to think about energy as both something we have today and something we have tomorrow. So we need to be practical. Today we have to burn fossil fuels. The question is, how do we do that? We can do it in a much more efficient way. So efficiency is the key. So if you look at pick the Chinese Premier has been here recently. So in China, one of the key strands of the 12th five-year plan is energy efficiency as a resource. They're going to discover energy by using less of it, and in a big way. And indeed, they have plenty of room to travel, because Japan, that's had virtually no natural energy resources, is around about 5 times as energy efficient as China. So this is a way of getting resources for the future. So I think that's really important. I think the innovation, so it's the invention plus the commercialization, so the innovation is that makes things possible in energy, will create more resources. An example is batteries. And if you have nowadays, you can make batteries that store a lot of energy rather safely. They're just quite big. You need something at the scale of this building to really make something practical for a big power station. But you could easily store 20 megawatt hours through battery systems at a power station, which may eliminate the need to have a power station on standby. So another way of thinking about it. So energy, I come back to the point I made. The two things we really need are water and energy, and then everything goes, as it were, in between it. That allows us to create food. We obviously need agricultural engineers and so on. But I say, actually, what we really need is we need water, energy, and great brains and leadership. And then combined with those three things, it seems to me you can do absolutely anything. Miss one, it's tough. It's really tough.
Thank you. I see an equation there. Water plus energy plus engineers equals something. Thank you. So the fourth question is from Richard Putland. Is he here? Thank you. There's a microphone coming your way.
Yeah. Yes, my question is that I work as a process design engineer for an oil and gas contracting company. Our projects are motivated by the economics in oil production, and while we're getting greener, it's driven only by legislation and government action. I wondered how you see things changing, the economic balance in the world, to drive us away from oil, and will that happen quickly enough? to save the environment?
So I think I'd add, well, first let me say, I think most actions are now undertaken through regulation and legislation, but also through economic efficiency. So the more energy efficient or the less emissions you make, generally you're getting a positive trade-off. Not always, but generally a positive trade-off. I think everyone is worried. So in industry, people are very worried about someone taking a free ride on their good works. So if someone says, well, I'm going to do something out of step with the rest of my industry, everyone looks around and says, someone's going to steal something from me if I do that. So there needs to be a real reason. So, for example, having too many accidents will create a reason. Being in a place where, in order to get a license, you have to voluntarily agree to do things. But, until the world seizes the moment and has a leader, or leaders who say, we're going to clean up our act, and we've actually got some solutions to do it with, then not much is going to happen, I'm afraid. There will be incremental change. And that may make it all a little too late. I want to believe it won't be too late, because I think people, the world does operate on the brink usually, and because people can't get excited until they see some visible danger. So I like to think that people will act. But it does require this point about leadership, not just in policy terms. I think most everyone in the world says if it's just a statement of policy, like we must reduce CO2, that's great. But the next question is how? What do we do next? And if someone says to you, we must save the world, we're going to clean up our CO2 act, and our action is to change our light bulbs, people say, is that commensurate with the size of the problem? And the answer is no, not really. It's a small contribution. And I think we've had the world go into that position once, and we mustn't do it again, because I think that boiling the world up to have a solution to what is a risk, it is not a definite problem, it is a risk, to boil people up to say we must do something about it and have nothing to do is very, very damaging indeed. We mustn't do that again.
Thank you, Lord Browne. Fifth question, okay. Fifth question is from Kwame Owusu. Is Kwame here? Okay, at the front.
Hello. My question, and I think it might have been addressed somewhat by the gentleman in the front, is to do with the uneven distribution of resources. And you cited water as a major example of such a resource. And I thought we have these examples of, one place where there's suffering drought and another area where there's flooding. And I was wondering if there's any initiatives to sort of reconcile these stark contrasts and to solve the issue of the uneven distribution of resources.
So I think whatever resource you look at in the world, other than perhaps the air, there's an uneven pattern of distribution, whether it's hydrocarbons, whether it's minerals, for example, whether it is agricultural products of different sorts, whether it's water, they're all unevenly distributed. And the population, because we're in a modern society, doesn't necessarily follow where the resources are. If I think we were in a very primitive type of society, there would only be enough people in a country, which would be completely isolated, to survive on what it had. But we don't work like that because we haven't worked like that for a long time. So there's this very complex interrelationship of distribution, which does, to an extent, rely on money. So it means that careless leadership consigns poor people into perpetual poverty because they have less resources to develop than they need. And that's why I think wise and good nations actually do something about it. They say, well, we'll give a piece of our action to you to help you along. And there is a vested interest in it, of course, because people who don't have anything have nothing to lose. And if they have nothing to lose, they can be very dangerous people. People who have nothing to lose are incredibly dangerous. But if they have something to lose, they could be tremendous allies. And so there is a real reason for this. So I think it is all about getting the world's trading systems right the whole time. This so-called Doha round is very necessary. It's the next step in world trade. I think that it's something about education, very important, and it's something about cycles and phases. For example, I think 7 years ago, everyone thought that Africa really needed perpetual aid, that it was very difficult to get people out of poverty. But actually with minerals suddenly being really important, there is a huge boom occurring in Africa that probably has transformed permanently the way in which many African nations think about themselves and they think about the continent. So that's certainly changed. China has, through its own resources, brought more people out of poverty than the whole of history added together. So it's actually happening there. India beginning to happen. So the good news is that there are fewer people in poverty as a result of resources. The bad news is there's still people in poverty as a result of lack of resources. I think we just have to keep it going.
Thank you. I've got another question here from Partici Chatterjee. Thank you.
Hi, I think you may have already answered this actually, but a lot of engineering projects sometimes cause a certain amount of, not perhaps destruction in the sense dams are built which displace people, sure. Mining activities do lead to a lot of environmental damage. How would you suggest that engineers sort of manage the challenge of balance, if you like, between the engineering aim of a project and the social and environmental needs?
So I think, again, to me, it's always been important to, almost right above my desk, there is no such thing as a risk-free action. There is no such thing. So the question only is, how do you manage the risks to the minimum level possible? How do you minimize damage? But more importantly, how do you bring people along with you while this happens? So understanding the big context in which you work is as important as the technology you use to get something done. And if you can't align people, then worry a lot, because people are very sensible. So, there's been a lot of problems, as you know, with hydro schemes, in particular if they require flooding habited areas. Run of the river, less so, although there are certainly biodiversity problems with hydro schemes. But a lot of them have been undertaken by fairly centralized governments who have just imposed them and then caused a lot of problems after the event. So Three Gorges Dam, for example, Three Gorges project probably could not be done today by the Chinese government. I think then it could be done. Now I think people are much more aware and much communicating with each other much more, and there'll probably be a large amount of civil disobedience which could stop that happening. I actually think that might have happened. So I think when you look at a project, you've got to understand whether you can actually minimize the risk of disruption to a community. Can you align people? Is there really something in it for them? Can they trust you? Do they really trust you in what you're doing? So these seem to be the factors which set the context of any engineering project. It doesn't matter how small or how big it is. Very different from a scientific project where you don't have to worry about the context at all. You're simply creating an option, an invention, which has to have commerciality and other things added to it to make it an engineered product.
Thank you. Then there are a series of questions that have been submitted by Babcock International. Is there somebody, one person who can sort of pool their questions? Because I'm keen to then open up the floor to the sort of spontaneous questions. So let's try and wrap them up and keep it relatively brief.
So I'm Keir Gravel, I'm a naval architect from Babcock International. One of the problems that we're seeing at the moment is a lot of emerging economies are actually wanting to obviously develop their standard of living and for the society as a whole. And how do we go about encouraging emerging economies from developing and not repeating the same mistakes that we have made in the past with regards to the allocation and the use of resources?
I think it's very difficult. There's a deep sort of sense that, almost everybody repeats the mistakes of the past, and it's completely counterproductive to go to someone and say, I wouldn't do that if I were you, because my experience tells me that it's a bad idea. Because they say, what do you know about it? Because that was then, this is now. It's the same is true with children, the same is true with adults, the same is true with old adults. Everyone really has that sort of characteristic. However, there are some good signs. For example, I sat on a commission once for the World Bank called the Growth Commission. And I was never quite sure why I was on this commission, because I was on a commission with 5 Nobel laureates in economics. And I'm not even an economist. But I guess I brought some practical aspects to it. And we realized, of course, that all the formulas for growth that people thought were the right way of doing things were actually wrong. And no one was learning from the right lessons from the past, but eight countries did, and they did it very well. So promulgating the lessons in a different way begins to change people's attitude, which brings me to the key point. The only way you can, I think, avoid lessons of the past is to keep improving the educational quality of the broad leadership in a country. But actually, it's what's in people's heads that makes all the difference. So it's actually educating people better, keeping the quality up, understanding the lessons from the past, and also understanding the relevance for the future. But it's only through education. I don't think it's through lecturing. I don't think it's through imposition. Actually, I think it starts early and is repeated often, in the right way. That, I think, begins to change things. But if you don't do that, you really can't make a breakthrough, I think, because human patterns, everyone knows better than anybody else. They just do.
I have to say I run a load of lessons learned sort of seminars, and it's remarkable how often the things happen time and time.
It is. I mean, I remember, you could actually take out reports.
Yes,
when I was in industry for so long, I could take out a report and say, actually, this new one, it's like that old one. Yeah. The words are just different,
Okay, so those were the submitted questions. Very interesting, and we've got time for some questions from... There's a gentleman in the front here.
Hi, Simon Scannell from BAE Systems. You talked about increasing the productivity of available resource, such as farmland. I was listening to an article on the radio recently about how sort of investment funds are buying up swathes of African land in anticipation that as Western countries become limited on their own farmland, they'll almost lease land from Africa in order to produce food for themselves. Obviously, there's an issue between African countries producing food for themselves and Western countries taking it out. Now, how would you suggest engineers get involved in that? Is the conscientious objector route, in the knowledge that someone else will probably just get in there and do it anyway, or are we better getting involved in that kind of thing and trying to change it from the inside and direct it so that it's a fairer way of doing things?
Well, I think the risks involved in these strategies are very, very high, first of all. And it won't be clear whether it really works because land is something that's the patrimony of a country. It's very, very close to people's hearts, and if they see it being used for other than their own purposes, sometimes they'll simply take it back, regardless of what the contract says. Expropriation of land is a well-known technique, a very well-known technique. However, I think it will carry on, and fashions will prevail, and people will say, let's go to Africa, let's go somewhere. Actually, they'll have to wait a bit of a time, because Brazil, which has a fantastic agricultural system, still has plenty of road to travel. But I think in these cases, you have to work from inside. You have to sort of say, well, this will be done in this way, we need to do it in the right way, and we need to do it in such a way that inevitably what is produced is used domestically as well as for export consumption. And I think you can do that by procuring goods and services inside the country itself allows people to ask a question, what's it being used for? And why aren't I getting a benefit other than financial from what's going on? I think that's important. It also actually stabilizes the relationship of the landowner with the country. So wise people would do that anyway. But there will be mistakes in this area. There will definitely be mistakes.
Thank you.
Interesting. Okay, there's another question over here, and then there's 3 more over there.
Lord Browne, Paul Dimmock of BP. I'm interested to know what role you think the Academy and various engineering institutions can play in raising the profile of engineers as leaders.
So it can't, so I think several things. First of all, I don't think the Academy would serve itself well by simply advertising that engineers are great people and they should be thought about and listened to in precedence to anybody else. I don't think it's a winning way, although I might agree with it. So I think we do it step by step. So, for example, we've built up a very deep relationship with the government, which didn't exist. We've built a much deeper relationship with educational institutions. We've re-established a definition of what an engineer should be. We've built relationships much deeper with companies, which is great. I think we've built relationships with, press and so forth better. Now, I think it's now up to everybody to just do their job, actually, and to do it very well, and to remind people that they are an engineer. And I looked at, you look at the number of people who are CEOs of companies, actually quite a few are engineers, but they don't say so, and they should simply say so. It's a very good profession to have, to go plenty of places as an engineer, not as a banker necessarily, but as an engineer. And so I think that it needs just people to do their job. I think the Academy has a great basis. It can do much more in the future. I think it's spreading its wings by inviting more people into the Academy other than just its fellows. And that's important. Well, I think engineering is a subject which requires great breadth indeed. And there are only so many fellows of the Academy, and there'll only ever be so many fellows of the Academy.
Thank you very much. So I think that 2 at the back, and then we'll work forwards.
David Dalpy, Chief Executive of Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. Great talk, John. You made a lot of play about engineering and leadership. We've got great brains. I mean, this room is an example of the fact that we've got great brains. EPSRC provides an enormous amount of great education and training for them. But that's the brains, the education, and the training are not the same as leadership. My question is, can we teach leadership? Are there elements of the training that we can give engineers which will enable them to grasp that leadership role that you're asking them to undertake?
Most definitely. And I think best expressed very practically by teaching a great generation of project directors and project managers. It's a real example of why you need all the skills of leadership. You need to understand your context, you need to understand your team, you need to align people, you need to be flexible, you need to be results-oriented, you need to have great information, all the things that leaders think about. And that's what a lot of engineers do. I mean, engineering is often divided, most into projects, actually, because it starts somewhere, it finishes somewhere. And that is part of the experience of every engineer. And I think that's why engineers can make great leaders, and leadership can be taught to engineers. But it should be part of the normal training for an engineer, either as a continuous professional development or possibly, and I think probably better there than at the undergraduate or early graduate level. I think an understanding of why things don't work the way they should is essential as a basis for understanding leadership. And for that, you need to have been in the real world for a little while, as I think many people have probably found out.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question there.
Okay. Hello, I'm Rachel Cook of Kraft Foods, and I'm also chairman of the Food and Drink Subject Group of the Institution of Chemical Engineers. So I wanted to talk about food and obviously its interaction with oil in the debate with biofuels, and also with water in terms of if we change our eating habits from meat towards crops, then we obviously use less water. As engineers and leaders, where do you feel we should concentrate our efforts, on the engineering solutions or on changing the habits through leadership?
So it's clearly both. I mean, we need to think about how behavior in this area boils down to efficiency, I think, efficiency and the right choices. Engineering provides the effectiveness to make it happen and make it in the right places. So I think it's both. Surely it must be both. I think if we are profligate and we do the wrong thing, almost any engineering would eventually simply be a plaster over a temporary bridge to another crisis. So managing both, I think, is very, very important indeed. Biofuels has been a very interesting conundrum, I think. I used to think that biofuels was a great solution to the future. I now have some questions in my mind. I think certain biofuels grown in a certain way, in certain locations, are a good solution. Not all biofuels are good. So the use of maize, corn in the middle of America is a very bad solution to biofuels. It's a very bad way of producing ethanol. The use of sugar cane planted on unused pasture in Brazil is a very good way of making ethanol for the time being, and very efficient too because it's a closed-end system. All the distillation juices are used as fertilizer, the bagasse, the leaves and what have you, and the straw is used for fuel, for electric generation. So it's a great system. And then there are things in between. There's been actually a lot of nonsense talked about the trade-off between biofuels and food. It's not as direct, I think, as some of the press have made it out to be. It's too easy a solution, it's too easy a conundrum to say, solve this way. It's not that. It's a much longer term question, I think, that it opens up, which is, what is the right balance between fuel and food? And I think there are some places where we see it, but other places where we don't. So that's why I say I'm of an open mind of this. The world consumes almost 2 million barrels a day of biofuels now, which is a lot. I mean, the world consumes 88 million barrels a day of liquids. So it's quite a big percentage now.
Thank you. There were a couple of other questions in that. Yes, one here, then one here. Oh, sorry, the lady at the back, I think, was first. Then there are these two here.
Hi, I'm Tara Barchi. I work for Centrica Energy. I'm an integrity engineer. My question to you, I guess, Lord Browne, is what responsibility should the government take for certain regulations that they set on the energy industry. I mean, currently my sector is affected by the tax hikes in the natural gas production. I understand we are net importers, so for the next 10 to 15 years, until we figure out what we're going to do in terms of the energy sustainability, what responsibility should the government take in this as well? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm delighted your chief executive, my very good friend, is saying exactly what he thinks in this area, which is you've made a mistake because you haven't produced. So he's said to the government, your role is to produce incentives for people to do the right thing, and you've just produced a disincentive, and you're going to make us do the wrong thing. So I applaud what he's doing. It may not change things, however, because the overriding the demand is for money at the moment, taxation money, into what is a very difficult situation for the government. Growth is low, for example. So I think the government has a very important role. My view of the government is that it should do the things that it and only it can do. And it should express itself in what it wants the economy to do by providing incentives and disincentives in broad sectors, very broad sectors. So another area that you're involved in is offshore wind. So offshore wind, if we look at offshore wind today, it's probably, 3 times more expensive than coal-fired power. So that's a bit steep, really. And people today with low wage inflation, actually frozen wages, don't really want to pay it. But the government has to figure out how to balance the energy system and to support different types of energy being put into the system, not on today's price, but on tomorrow's price. So the theory being, if I set up incentives, many people will do this, and a learning curve, an experience curve will take place. Cost of turbines will come down because there'll be more of them. We'll get used to installing them faster, and so the cost will come dramatically down. That's the bet. And the other bet is, compared with gas, which we're no longer importing, it actually might get relatively cheaper because we don't know what the future holds. So they're expressing themselves in a policy through these different actions. Whether it's the policy they mean to have is another matter, but they're most definitely expressing themselves. And that's what governments have to do.
Thank you. There are 2 questions here. 1 and 2.
Hi, Simon Davis, BP. I had a question, Lord Browne. When you first took over as CEO of BP, you inherited a company with deep financial problems. And as young engineers, we have inherited a country with deep financial problems. And I was wondering if you had any advice for a room full of young engineering leaders as to what we can do to make the UK competitive again.
Well, the glib and obvious answer is do a great job, which is sort of true, because if everybody were operating at the top of their game, then by definition the team has great players, and then they need to pull together. And I think the important point is pulling together. So what the government mustn't do is get in the way of that, and they need to demonstrate that they're as efficient and effective as they possibly can be in the redistribution of your money. And that, I think, is sort of the common theme behind so many governments, and I'm an independent peer, let me say, so I have no side, no dog in this fight, as it were. But I think that's what they're actually doing. And in fact, I'm advising the government independently on just how to do that, which is to, I think of things in very simple 3, 4, or 5 points only, because nobody can retain any more than that. So, and there may be things to think about. So we've got the government now, through the departments of state, each one of which has a board of directors with independent business people on it, operating on 5 things. First is strategic clarity. Getting strategy clear may sound obvious, but it's not. Secondly, having commercial sense. Don't make the government into a business, because you can't. You're not earning any money. You're just taking it. So it's not a business. No business takes money. But make it commercially sensible. In other words, think about the things that make things efficient and effective. Thirdly, deal with your talent. You know, it's as important as in a company to get individuals great. It's important in government to do that well and to teach them how to work together so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Fourth, always focus on results. Don't just focus on process. And fifth, measure what you treasure and treasure what you measure. These are simple things which I hope will actually change the way government thinks about itself. It'll take time, and it's more complicated than these 5 statements because people have to do stuff behind each one. But actually, if you don't lose the plot and don't lose the statements, it might be a little recipe to get things more effective. You know, I could argue that there are plenty of other things we can do, like invent new businesses and industry, but that will happen if we have a clear strategy about what it is we want to do as a country, which is we actually want to compete, in essence, through our innovation. Because whatever you say about the great blocks that are coming up behind us, the thing that we have a little advantage over anybody else is innovation. I don't mean invention, I mean innovation. Adding inventions to commerce, putting them together, stirring up with engineers and doing something. And that's what this country does brilliantly if it has its confidence back.
Thank you.
Okay. Then it's your turn.
Thank you. Sam Cockrell from Libertine. Global resource scarcity presents both an opportunity and a challenge for the UK. The challenge is obvious. We have to improve our own resource use efficiency. But the opportunity is to develop novel, exportable technologies and solutions so that China, India, and other high-growth economies can deal with their resource challenges. Now, do you believe that the UK adequately recognises that opportunity, or is it too myopically focused on our own challenge through the carbon budgets and the other sort of UK-focused policy measures that we have?
So I think there are a lot of companies represented in this room that actually look at the world and say we're just headquartered in the UK, we like the UK, great place to be, but actually the world out there is where it's all at. And my old company, I mean, the amount of activity in the UK which is BP is tiny. But that's not the point. So I think you need both. You need a great hinterland of people doing things for the country to provide the markets and skills to build upon. So the whole small and medium-sized enterprise sector has to have something to do in this country as well as export. That's for sure. And I think that mix just needs to be reflected. We need the great companies only doing things overseas. We need a small and medium-sized enterprise sector that actually does things here, invents things, puts them into the market here, innovates, and then takes them overseas. And I think there are things that we can do. I can see things where, for example, in my own experience, where I still deal with energy, but I deal with energy with tiny companies now, tiny, quite the different. Actually, I've learned a lot. I've realized what how damaging a big company can be to a small company. Probably I learned that too late. But actually, it's quite interesting. But I also observe how small companies in other countries are doing sometimes better than the ones we have here. In energy, for example, I look at the activities in the battery area, which is now really in the hands of the US and China, and could have been here, because it's not just chemistry. It's actually manufacturing. It's also software control, because every battery has a battery management system, which is about how you balance all the cells and things like that. This is really important stuff for the future. We could gain some of that back. We need some entrepreneurs to figure out what to do there.
Thank you. Sir?
Simon Marshall from MetaSwitch Networks. So during your initial talk, you touched briefly on the word fear. And later on, you've mentioned the press and you've mentioned education. Now, clearly, longer term, education is a great solution to that. You educate people properly, they understand that things like nuclear power are, when managed correctly, certainly compared to coal and gas-powered plants, a viable solution. However, in the shorter term, something which worries me, what could we possibly do, short of limiting freedom of the press, which is obviously not really an option? What could we possibly do to handle that?
Well, I think you make a very good point, because a lot of decisions are affected by people reading the press in a way which is too sensitive. You have to be tough. And in order to be tough, you have to have been toughened up. And some politicians are simply not toughened up. Others are very tough. They say, well, it's an interesting sector I need to think about, but it doesn't provide me with the answer. So again, we have to do mass education. Mass education. And there has to be clarity that actually we'll do it right. We'll do the best possible job. We'll consult locally. We'll make sure we have everyone involved. There'll be information available for people. And it's surprising what happens, actually. As you get people closer to your problem and how you have to solve it and make it their problem, and then something in it for them, which is jobs or something, then they'll come along with you. I have direct experience of this. I have direct experience of people who, when you go in, you say, I'm an expert, I'm here, trust me, I'm going to do it. Then they say, so you think you're smart? You think you're powerful? Let me show you. And they stop you. If, on the other hand, you say, well, I'm thinking about this, it's a very good idea, but I understand that you're very frightened of it, but can we perhaps talk about it and actually get a dialogue going, then you can begin to reduce the worst fears. But everybody has fears. That's what motivates half the population, fear. The other half, well, hopefully it's aspiration, but it may also be guilt. But it's fear for half and aspiration for the other. So I think you've just got to worry about how people naturally think. And I think corporations are very bad at this, because corporations can look terribly frightening, because they forget that they're just sums of people, as opposed to, but they become something else. They have to go back to be very human to get the dialogue going. And I think then you can persuade people. You can't persuade all the people in all the places. But I think, with time you can.
Thank you. We've got time if there are one or two more, not that many more. So there's one there and two there. So let's have the one in the middle, then the one at the back. So you, sir.
Emil Chep, London Underground. Do you see much hope in fusion power, or are there any other sort of nascent technologies in the provision of energy or water which you're looking forward to?
I'm the wrong person to ask about fusion. We should ask David. But I used to be a physicist, but a long time ago. So all my friends in this area tell me that actually it's a matter of the amount of money you put in it, because it is the grandest of engineering problems, actually, the grandest of engineering problems. And no one is prepared to put in, I think, David, the right amount of money, because it's so big. So it may be, because there's time, it may just be that circumstances might create a moment where you can actually put that amount of money back into the system to get it done. I think I come back to, we are going to have to figure out how to be much more efficient about energy. I mean, a quantum leap. Things like smart grids and smart meters and the ability to load shed and things like that, very important. But actually, it's the behavior point that you came up with food applies to energy widely. We are very luxurious in the way we think about what we can do with our lives, not worrying about the consequences on others. So transportation, is a big one. Heating, lighting, everything. So I think the efficient use of energy is important. And I think, therefore, the efficient storage of energy is really important. As you know, we don't operate, well, no individual, except maybe a junior banker, operates 24/7. And so, you know, we have downtime, and so we need to figure out how to use that effectively.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's not for our trains yet. Okay. There's another question there, and then there's one over here. Thanks.
Hi, Patrick Davies from ExxonMobil. I've been reading a lot recently about how the Chinese are quietly entering markets such as Africa and Brazil and embedding themselves within the economy to access the resources. So they're actually providing turnkey infrastructure and engineering solutions in return for mineral resources. I was just wondering how the Western world and the UK can counter that and regain access.
As you know, it's what we used to do. And so the strategies are well known, and it's happening everywhere, not so quietly as well. But I think the other thing they're doing is, so they're smarter than we were, they're also embedding themselves for technology reasons. So why would the Chinese national offshore oil company go to the onshore United States and buy $1 billion worth, at least $1 billion worth of shale gas? Answer? Because they need the know-how. They've got the technology, but they don't understand how to apply it. So they need the know-how. So it's happening everywhere. We just have to compete on a different basis. That's all. And, you know, we have to compete very effectively and very quickly. I think I would have said 5 years ago that the pace at which China will embed itself in economies is limited by its confidence, because the further away from China it goes, the more difficult it is to control. I don't agree with myself anymore, because when you look at China and see the Premier come last week, I was in China 2 weeks ago, fourth time this year, the confidence level is gigantic. The confidence level is gigantic. So they will get resources. There is no doubt. I don't think it'll cause conflict. It's just that we have to think about a different way of doing it. And I think we can. You know, well, we're demonstrating that we can, not least by innovation, i.e. shale gas, shale oil, for example.
Thank you. And there was one final question over here.
You talked very eloquently, Lord Browne, about engineers being the leaders of the future. Do you think at £9,000 a year, future engineering leaders will be put off even going to university?
No, I don't. I think some people will be put off, and if I may, I naturally agree with myself. I wanted to make sure there was actually no cap on fees, so that things were priced according to purpose and quality. Let me back up if I can. I don't think that they will be put off, and I also think that engineers in particular will actually, it is statistically the highest paying profession. And I believe things tend to adjust according to the cost of preparing the person over the long term. I think the other thing is people will think about what they will do at university. I think people have not thought about this previously. I think the job market and the fundamental change in the way in which people think about the future, before people now go to university, they'll think very carefully, what should I be doing? And what should I be doing when I get out of university? And I think all the proposals I made were designed to do that and to make sure that universities competed with each other for the best, which meant they also competed with each other for quality. So I don't think it will put people off. And the evidence I have is the following, that 40% of the people doing degrees in the UK do them part-time. And of that, 3/4 pay for themselves. And for years, they've never got 1 penny from the government. Nothing. And yet they do it. And they do it because they know it will increase their salability, their optionality for the future. And I think that's important to remember. So, and I think in the end, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens to pricing. You can't adjust a system and expect it to respond instantly. Not something as diffuse as this. I have a feeling that pricing will vary quite a lot as students decide to go, the better students decide to go to some places and not to others. People will say, well, actually, engineering is the unusual one because very few people go into engineering as a soft option. But other courses will adjust significantly. So let's see. We'll review in 3 years' time, I think.
Okay, thank you. I would like, I think, to draw this to a close unless somebody's about to burst with a question I haven't asked. So I thought it'd be helpful just to summarise some of the questions and the themes, because I thought this was an absolutely fascinating evening. Clearly the interplay between water and energy was a major theme, and I think the slides were fantastic, and I'm going to take them to my kids and show them. You talked about leadership a lot and the role of engineers as leaders. There's some themes that came up, I thought, about the whole thing about how you teach engineer leadership, the role of engineering degrees, education, role models in this academy. I thought there's much discussion on the financial regulatory incentives for investment and prioritisation. That was very interesting. I thought very interesting the opportunities that are now emerging in emerging economies to rebalance their futures, if you like, by trading off on some of these very scarce resources. Very interesting. And finally, I think the theme about the UK PLC and being able to compete through innovation was very strong. So I think there's much, despite we mustn't be daunted by this, there's a lot of hope here, a lot of hope, I think. And I thank you very, very much, Lord Browne, for an absolutely fascinating discussion. Thank the audience, some brilliant questions that gives us all confidence that the leadership and the brains trust is here, no doubt about it. And there are drinks and canapes over, and I look forward to all of you having great careers in engineering. So maybe thank Lord Browne for a great
Thank you. Thank you.